Today on Pilot's Discretion, our guest is seaplane pilot Paul Harding. He tells us about flying on floats in the Bahamas, buying an airplane before learning to fly, and the best places in the Caribbean for scuba diving. Pilot's Discretion starts right now. Hello, pilots. I'm John Zimmerman, and thanks for listening to Pilot's Discretion from Sporties. Visit sporties.com/podcast for today's show links and access to our complete archives. And remember to leave us a review in your favorite podcast app so other pilots can find the show. Today, my guest is Paul Harding, who had what many pilots would probably consider a dream job. In 1990, he started the first commercial seaplane operation in the Bahamas and retired 17 years later with nearly 14,000 hours of experience as a commercial, multi, and instrument pilot with both land and sea ratings. Paul is a contributor to Airfax and has also published a book called Sharks in the Runway. Paul, welcome to Pilot's Discretion.
Hey, thank you, John. What a pleasure.
You bought a seaplane before you even knew how to fly. So my first question is, why would you do something like that? And I guess maybe more strangely, would you recommend that strategy for other pilots?
Well, what they call that thing called a midlife crisis. I had a really successful career going down every day. In 1976, I started a day charter business here in the Bahamas from scratch. I mean, really from scratch. I found an old boat with 3 feet of grass growing in it. So, that with an old 14 horsepower McCulloch engine, I started a dive company and slowly worked my way up to a 28-foot Bertram, taking 18 to 20 people out. So one day, after 18 years nearly going down every day, I saw one of those things fly overhead, and I went, "Oh dear God, I got to give that a try." And my dad was in aviation; he was a flight engineer, and but he was one of those dads that never gave me a boost into aviation, which I craved to do even as a kid. So I ended up going down underwater all the time. And that career led to many different things, even being an underwater cameraman for the Discovery Channel, working for an American producer out of Beaumont, Texas. And once I saw that thing fly over, my mother had a fit. I walked in the house one day and she looked at me with that wise knowledge of what a son had just done, saying, "Oh my God, what's happened?" And I said, "Well, I've ordered an airplane." And and she said, "Oh dear God, what do you mean ordered? That implies that it's new." And I said, "Well, yeah, actually it is. It's actually a seaplane." With that, there was another gasp, and she said, "Oh my God." She said, "But you don't know how to fly." And I said, "I know." I said, "But it's being built in Moultrie, Georgia. It's a seaplane through a friend of mine who had one here. And I'm going away in November to learn how to fly in Florida." So that's how it all started.
Many of our listeners have dreamed of doing seaplane flying. Some of them may regularly do seaplane flying. Tell us about that experience. What's the best part and worst part? You see a lot of videos online or pictures of, you've got some great ones on Airfax of fishing from the wing or the float of your seaplane. It looks very romantic and very relaxing. So is that true? Is that the best part, and what are the less good parts that we don't always see on YouTube?
Yeah, I was one of those guys who I didn't want to be an airline pilot. I didn't want to sit there and, for hours and hours going across the Atlantic. Maybe I thought I need to be hands-on. I need to really enjoy the art of flying. And I remember taking my instrument rating and reading a book about the art of instrument flying. And flying to me was an art. I am an artist. I like paint. So being an art, I thought that would be something that floatplanes could offer, because the runway is variable every single day. It's not that piece of concrete where it's 1-4 or 3-2. It's something where you have to take into fact the wind, the tide, the waves. And here in the Bahamas, of course, we have 700 islands scattered over, 1,500 square miles. I mean, it's amazing. So when I got the airplane, I actually soloed. I soloed in 9 hours, and then went and picked up the airplane with just under 50 hours experience. And a friend of mine accompanied me, and we flew it back here down to the outer islands into the Exumas, which is one of our most amazing pieces of the archipelago. And there I was able to practice, the short takeoff and landings, the crosswind takeoffs and landings, stuff like that. So the art got perfected quite quickly. And, even after a weekend, my friend turned me loose and said, you've got the hang, you've got the touch. So be careful. It's a learning experience. And we took it from there. And I landed in Nassau Harbor. My mom sat on the ramp that I had built and taxied up, bumped onto the ramp and stepped out with this Cheshire cat grin on my face. And she said, "Oh, dear God, I wish your dad could see you now."
What was the hardest skill to learn there when you're learning to fly seaplanes? Maybe for a land plane pilot transitioning, it's different from someone learning from scratch, but which piece is the biggest challenge there?
Takeoffs and landings, it's the same, really, probably, a lot of it in a land plane scenario. But the water, if you don't choose the right path and you haven't got all the factors in a row, we have an expression that we love to fly float planes, but gosh, they can really bite if you're not paying attention. So coming into land, you really have to know the area. You have to know what the wind's doing. You have to know what the boat traffic's doing. There's so many factors that you have to take in. Once you've got those, then it all works. And of course, I was flying a Maul, which was very forgiving, an amazing airplane.
We talk a lot about the go, no-go decision in aviation. In land planes, it often gets sort of reduced to weather. But I imagine on floats, it's a much more complicated decision. You're not just thinking about the weather. There's, as you said, the runway changes all the time. So you mentioned boat traffic, and obviously you care about the tide and the waves. What are some of those other pieces that go into making a go, no-go decision in a seaplane when the environment's constantly changing around you? You've got different, I'm sure, passenger or cargo loads. What are you thinking about when you make that decision?
Yeah, basically all of the above, my friend. I've had, I'll tell you one no-go, which was on a landing, and that was down in the Exumas, where I've got everything on final. I've got a couple of people in the airplane with their baggage, and I'm about to touch it down when a 300-pound loggerhead turtle just decided to take a breath in front of me. So I would have either hit this big boulder that arose out of the ocean, or I had to do a go-around. So yeah, that's the amount of stuff that you have to have on your mind. It's it's quite a full workload, but a hell of a lot of fun.
How about the difference between saltwater and freshwater, the ocean and lakes? I have a whopping 10 hours of seaplane time, all of it in lakes in Florida. But certainly the ocean brings new challenges. So what's different in that environment where you spent most of your career?
We had an expression here from the fellow float pilots. They said, "Oh, welcome to the world of float flying. You are now landing an airplane in warm battery acid." So I thought, oh, great. So the secret of success, I ended up owning 4 airplanes, 4 float planes. You would fly them for 3 or 4 years. You could prepare for the saltwater effects. But as they say, you win many a battle, but you end up losing the war. So you would have to then draw the line and say, okay, the airplane has become too much. I need to sell it off as a project and start again. So that's what I did. But it was the preparation that was the secret. And I learned after, airplane number 4, there was a lot of stuff I could do with asking Maul to prepare the airframe the way I wanted it. That is, powder coat didn't work, had to be coated with a 2-part epoxy, fill the frame full of linseed oil so it didn't corrode from the inside out, and then using some of the, the anti-corrosion sprays. And every day, I mean, even finally, I went from straight floats onto amphibious. And it was prep before you even roll it out the hangar, and it was prep before you put it back in again. A lot of work, a lot of expense. Float flying commercially in saltwater is very expensive. And eventually, as I said, you do lose the war. The secret is to know when to draw the line.
You mentioned straight floats versus amphibs. How do you approach flying differently there? Obviously, you've got the wheels and there's some risks there, but what are the elements of flight planning and in the air that change when you're on amphibs versus straight floats?
Well, I'll be honest with you. With the mole, I was always curious as to how this was going to go because I was operating off a near freshwater lake. When I landed in the lake for the first time, I was in Nassau Harbor, which was probably the worst training ground for any seaplane pilot. But I had to overcome it. That was my choice. And then I moved over to a lake, which was nearly freshwater. When I landed in it for the first time and taxied up to the ramp I'd built there, all the dogs on that property ran down the hill to greet me, and they started drinking. Well, I thought, all right, I'm on the right track now. But same thing, the worst corrosion then was rainwater, because not all these airplanes are waterproof. So you'd have water entering through the top of doors and trickling down and entering and corroding the frame down all the lower longerons. So it still became a battle, but on saltwater, of course, it was multiplied tenfold.
You learned to fly later in life, as you mentioned, as sort of a midlife crisis. Were there anything that intimidated you about that, or anything you wish you had done differently? Because I always think about pilots who learn to fly at 17, starting a career versus learn to fly in their 40s or 50s, that it's a different experience, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, tremendous. I mean, but the chap who gave me my first introductory lesson in a Piper Arrow, I think, was here at the local flying club. And he was a guest of mine on one of my boats. And he ended up to be the training captain for Britannia over in the UK. And Colin took me flying over. I think we flew down Eleuthera at probably 10 feet, something highly illegal. But back in those days, we could do such foolishness. But he said, something, you've got the touch. There are a lot of guys who fly airplanes who just, they treat them like a truck. And it is an art. And if you have that, what he called the touch, which I was very proud to carry that label and then passed it on to other pilots that I knew and flew with me. There is an art in putting an airplane down, even on the water and on the concrete. So that was the difference. Flying an amphib, back to your question, what was the difference? And I'll be honest with you, with the mole, I really didn't notice that much difference. She performed very well. Takeoff and landings were the same. The weight distance was, you would lose a little bit of the useful load, but otherwise the airplane like that really performed beautifully. And there were others, in the aviation field in floatplanes, which just do not perform. So if you're going to fly floats, find an airplane that has this amazing performance, which will take the workload off you.
I love how you say it's an art, because I think all flying is an art to some extent, probably seaplane flying more than others. Is there a way to learn that art? You mentioned you seem to have just been born with some ability for it, but it also strikes me as something that is passed down more by experience than really academic learning or even maybe flight instruction. Is there some sense of that you just have to learn by doing and having experience in those changing conditions, different places, different water surfaces, different weather?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I learned in that famous flight school over with John Brown and Chuck Brown at Brown Seaplane Base, which so many of us frequented. And they were fabulous and gave me a lot of really good lessons. I would say probably the fact that I had bought an airplane, so I could now build up my hours as I wanted. The money that I was spending otherwise on rental went into my own pocket to repay myself. And that was the secret, was the hours that I could put in and the variation of different days. whether the water was choppy, whether it was calm, glassy water, crosswind work. Slowly, I could build that amount of time. And that was the secret, I think.
You mentioned glassy water landing. So for non-seaplane pilots, explain what that's all about, because it seems like glassy water should be great. It's smooth, it's calm. Why is flat, glassy water a bad thing?
Oh, a friend of mine invited me up to British Columbia, and he also had a mall, and it was the turbine version, which he had found in California. And the lakes up in British Columbia often are literally like glass. They're like a mirror. So your depth perception goes completely out the window. I don't care who and how many hours you've got in that airplane. If you don't do it, the approach to that landing correctly, it's not going to go well. I was with Tracy. Tracy was flying the airplane. I told him how to do this approach, and he sort of did it within reason, but he didn't judge it eventually. And of course, we dropped out of the sky and hit the water with a thud. So the way to do it was to approach the edge of the water above a certain reference point, and then add in a rate of descent and hold that rate of descent and hold that pitch angle correctly and wait. And it is that weight that drives you crazy, because you're going, it's got to land now. I really think I'm going to touch the water now. And you're not. You're still 10 feet above it. So that becomes something that you really need some training to do.
It's a very strange sensation. I've compared it sometimes to touching down from a hover in a helicopter. You're just sure that the ground is right there, 1 inch away, but it doesn't seem to be. And you just keep going down, and you just have to trust that procedure and that slow descent, and it'll eventually happen. You can't rush it.
And how sweet it is when you do it right. If you do it by the book and you do that approach, and then, there are people, I had it here when I was commercially flying. There's a lot of days we don't get much glassy water in the Bahamas because there's always a trade wind blowing somewhere. So even when it's calm, there's a ripple, so you've got a point of reference. But when you do that landing, and you can maybe finesse it a little bit with one float first and then let the other one come down, and somebody says, "Ow, I didn't even feel that," then you become the proverbial peacock and raise the feathers.
Paul, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about the Bahamas.
Earn all your pilot ratings and keep your flying skills sharp with Sporty's Pilot Training Plus. This all-inclusive membership unlocks Sporty's complete library of award-winning video courses, so you can learn anywhere you have your phone, tablet, or laptop. For one annual fee, you get access to over $1,500 in courses, a smart investment in your flying career. Plus, enjoy free shipping every day of the year at sporties.com and apply for one of our 3 annual flight training scholarships. Learn more at sporties.com/pilot training. Now, back to Pilot's Discretion.
We are back with Paul Harding, who moved to the Bahamas at 12 years of age and has been flying there for over 30 years, so he knows it well. Paul, the Caribbean's a dream destination for many pilots. It's within reach of the U.S. in a piston airplane, but it's still far enough away it feels exotic for most of us.
Yeah.
So what's your advice for someone who's making their first trip to the Bahamas? If they haven't been there before, certainly they're going to do planning, there's paperwork and customs, but what would you put on their list to think about?
We are 700 islands scattered from one end to the other. We have a lot of private airfields. So you'd have to do the work, the research. You can get a lot of information from our Ministry of Tourism, which does encourage private flying in our country. As you said, there is certain protocols. Paperwork has to be done. You have to come into a port of entry. So you need to find those. Which is like Freeport, Grand Bahama, into the Berry Islands, somewhere in Andros, or over to New Providence, up in Abaco as well. So once you've done the paperwork, they have a piece of paper called a transire, which customs will give you. You keep in the airplane so that you can actually move around the country, and wherever anybody asks, if you land at another airport, a customs officer or a policeman may come out and just say, "I need to see your transire," and then he'll initial it. And that keeps you legal within the country. But as I said, many airports, float flying, you do have to have prior permission to come because there are only a certain amount of areas that are certified as water landing areas. So it's a little bit restricted on float flying, but on regular flying, single engine piston, multi-engine. I mean, you just come out of Florida. We're only 186 miles to Nassau, and Bimini is 40 miles. So, I mean, you've got something very close where the experience can change very quickly, and it's a lot of fun. But weather, pay attention, really pay attention, get a good weather forecast.
Many Americans, when they hear Bahamas, will think of Nassau. Maybe they've been there on a cruise, and that's a fun city. But there's a whole world beyond the larger towns, the out islands. I've spent some incredible flying trips down there in the Abacos and the Luthra and the Exuma, as you mentioned. There's just some wonderful islands out there. So tell us about the difference between the bigger city of Nassau and maybe what somebody's seen from a cruise ship versus the experience if I'm flying into one of those out islands.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I had my boat business and I used to sell the proverbial T-shirt to people, on the back of my shirt design was the expression, "Come see the real Bahamas." And the islands that you've just mentioned, you know very well what I'm talking about. You come to Nassau or Freeport on a cruise ship, or you come and stay in Atlantis for 3 or 4 nights and they go back. You have not seen our country. The out islands are the secret of success, and they're all different. You know well. You can be in Abaco, and they go down to Eleuthera, and then down to the Exumas, Long Island. You're talking every time you go, it's different and more beautiful. You think you've seen something beautiful up in the north, and you go down in the south, and you just can't stop taking photographs from out the window. So very different experience. I would always say, do the out islands of our Bahamas to come see the real country.
Great advice. And I think it's easier than most pilots maybe think to see multiple. You want to pick home base at one of those islands, but airplanes is not just a luxury in the Bahamas, as you said. It's a way to get around with 700 islands. And it's so easy to island hop around. Once you've done that basic paperwork, you can see 6 or 7 islands in a couple of days and really get a feel for it. So I think that's just a wonderful way to do a flying trip of the Bahamas. Don't just go park on a beach somewhere. Get out and see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a film about the Bahamas, and I was based in Stella Maris for the first part, where we could do the southern islands first. I was in a Navajo at the time, and I mean, we were all over the place. But as you said, when you're based in one spot where you could come home to roost at night, but then you would go out and experience the rest of the country. Great experience.
How about IFR flying in the Bahamas? There's some good pilot jokes about whether it really exists. Obviously, it does for the airlines, but if I'm headed down there and I'm used to flying IFR all across the U.S., is that an option down there, or should I plan to do more VFR flying?
Definitely plan on VFR flying. IFR is available, but then of course you need the altitude to get coverage from Miami Center, and you need to be up there 5, 6, 6.5, 7,500 to get that IFR. Otherwise, keep it low.
What has changed the most about flying in the Bahamas over the last 30 years? You have the unique perspective of having flown there for so long. Has technology changed it the way it has in the U.S. in some ways? Have cell phones made things easier? What's new now that you didn't experience when you first got started?
The amount of traffic, for one thing. I mean, back in the days, it was very quiet. I mean, you could land on an hour runway and find one airplane or nobody there. Now we have ADS-B, which is compulsory here, so everybody knows and everybody can see where you are. But otherwise, I would say volume has changed. But our out islands are still way back, so it is rather like the old days. Just you stay on the frequency traffic if there's any around.
And what's your favorite pre-flight planning tool there? I know, in the old days, we looked at the book with all the pictures of the runways. Certainly there's apps now like ForeFlight. Do I need to call some of these smaller airports? Do I need to get local knowledge? What's the right way if I haven't been to one of these out island airports? Is there something I should do other than just looking in ForeFlight?
I would say that would cover you. It's so relaxed in a lot of the out islands. I mean, you just stay on frequency and talk to traffic, and really that's about all you need to do. Most important thing is that weather forecast. What's it going to be when I get there? What's it going to be when I need to get out and get back to the base that I'm situated at? So that plays a big part. So, that proverbial cell phone with the weather updates and satellite is very important to have. And we do have a lot of cell service throughout the country, so it does work.
All right, Paul, we always end Pilot's Discretion with a lightning round called Ready to Copy. This is where I'll throw out some questions on a range of topics, and you read back with your quick answer. So are you ready to copy?
Ready to copy.
Who's the most famous person you've ever flown in your seaplane operation?
Oh, gosh. The last 3 years of my career float flying, I was Johnny Depp's pilot.
Wow. There must be some stories there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, one or two. He has a private island. So I used to take him when he arrived here. I'd fly him down there.
Seaplane pilots are well known for being able to figure out which way the wind is blowing. You mentioned this, talking about the runway always changing. So can you share some of that wisdom? What's a tip for me to read the wind speed and direction if I'm in an airplane and there's no windsock?
Okay, flying over the island. Most of our islands are not that wide. So whichever shoreline you're going over, you look for that glassy water. And that will show you wind streaks on the water. If it's blowing reasonable enough, 10 to 15, there's going to be a pattern on the water. And water here in shallow water does affect what's on the bottom. You can read seaweed lines. And if not, then you fly over low, and maybe there's a bunch of seagulls all standing on the beach, and they're all pointing into wind.
Great tips. I knew you'd have them. I knew seaplane pilots always have good tips there. You've got a lot of time in the mall, as you mentioned. What's unique or interesting about that airplane compared to better known airplanes like a Cub or a Champ that people might picture when they think of a tail dragger?
The mall, it has that big wing, smaller ailerons, but it's a flying machine. I've landed in what people call a postage stamp, with some little creeks over in Andros where the bonefish lodges are. And I've always had an uneasy passenger sitting in the co-pilot seat say, you're going to land there? And I say, yes, sir. Just hang on. You'll see. And so good flying machine. Great flying machine. There are other airplanes. Some of the Cessnas, make sure you got lots of runway and nothing at the other end.
You're a longtime boat captain, like you said. You're a longtime pilot. So you've got both sides of this. I sometimes see scary videos online of boats and seaplanes. So if I'm in a boat, let's say I'm not the pilot today, I'm cruising around in my boat and I see a seaplane operating, what should I do to stay safe? Do I stay out of the way? Who has the right of way? What's the right answer there?
On the water, then you have to obey by the nautical rules. But if you're in the air, if I was a boat and I look around and I see a seaplane approach, I'm going to give him the right of way, because I know that his landing area has a lot of obstacles already in it. Like when I was landing in Nassau Harbor, or I was working, Chalk's. Chalk's airline was landing in the harbor back in those days. We'd have to talk to each other. But the guys on the ground in the water taxis, the jet skis, the ferries, they weren't looking for us. So, I have to pay attention. And the airplane has to take into account that the boat is not going to see you, and vice versa.
What's your favorite airport in the Bahamas?
Oh, lordy. That favorite airport. Okay, so I'm putting it down on the hard. Is that correct?
That's right. You're going to actually have to put the wheels down for this one.
Well, a nice challenge is halfway down the Exumas, which I think you've probably been to, is Staniel Key. Now, Staniel Key has a north-south runway, and our prevailing wind is out of the east. So, pay attention. I've been there in the Navajo, and I was unable to put it on the runway. I had to do the go-around and swallow my pride and go back to Nassau. That easterly wind, that crosswind can do you. So that would be the most interesting one, I think.
It's a sporty little runway. I think I've flown over it and looked at it and never had the guts to actually land there. So.
Yeah.
How about your favorite island? Forget about airport. Where's just the best place to go in the Bahamas?
Gosh, I've been shooting video on my latter part of my career, which I still do out of a 172, which I had the windows modified so that I could shoot aerial photography. So recently we've been doing quite a bit, and I've narrowed it down to Eleuthera. Eleuthera is over 100 miles long, got a couple of really nice runways, a couple of really nice airports. The people are wonderful. There's so much to see and do. Now, we just came back from Abaco, and I will say the same there. I was based at Marsh Harbor, and a lovely way to explore over there. But I'd probably narrow it right now. I mean, the Exumas were my favorite from a boating point of view, and from float flying. That was hard to beat. It's 365 islands in a row, and they are, as you well know, stunning from the air, let alone when you land on them. But Eleuthera, from a pilot's point of view, I would thoroughly recommend that. You've got a lot of choices of things to do and places to stay.
Great suggestion. How about diving? You spent some time diving, so maybe all over the Caribbean. If I'm a scuba diver looking for my next great spot, what would you suggest?
A Bahamian out island. I mean, there's some lovely stuff around Nassau. So if you are coming to Nassau, you can go out with somebody like Stuart Cove and go off the southwest end of our island. I shot the first shark movie for Discovery Channel, and that was in Long Island. So any of the out islands have really undisturbed reefs. They have some good diving over there. I would say probably one of the resorts in the out islands is going to give you something beautiful. The barrier reef on Andros is the second largest on the planet. Plenty of choices.
Okay, I'm at the bar after a day of island flying, and I've got a cold drink, but now it's time to order food. Should I order the grouper or the conch?
Both. And, conch fritters, conch salad made by the locals, can't beat it. Just can't beat it. And the grouper, grouper fingers, peas and rice and fried plantain, you're off and running. But there's a secret here. If you can find somebody who cooks hogfish, hog snapper is the one to get.
Excellent local knowledge. That's great.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned the documentary part and working in the TV world. And so if I'm looking for a documentary, what's the difference between a really great one and a mediocre one? Is there something you're looking for as somebody who's been involved that you can tell the difference between a good one and a bad one?
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely for sure subject matter. I was hired by a producer, as I said, out of Beaumont. And he told me, because he was a client on my boat trip, and he saw how I could free dive, and he said, I'll fly you all over the planet. We'll have a pile of fun. We won't make any money, by the way. But that's what we did. I was diving in the Red Sea. I shot ski films with the Norwegian ski champion in Utah. I was doing all kind of crazy stuff. So subject matter, definitely. That'll keep your attention.
All right, Paul, our last question is always the same on this podcast. You have one final flight, and we want to know, what are you flying and where are you going?
Oh, I'll go back to my mall. I will rotate out of Nassau, and I'll head down to the Exumas, and I'll make a few water landings down there, and then pull up to the Staniel Key Yacht Club, and I'll have a local meal looking out of my mall, anchored right up against the beach at Staniel Key.
Hard to beat that. Paul, thanks for being on the podcast.
You're very welcome. It was nice meeting you, John. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Pilot's Discretion, brought to you by Sporties, training and equipping pilots worldwide for over 60 years. For more episodes and today's show links, visit sporties.com/podcast. I'm John Zimmerman. We'll see you next time on Pilot's Discretion.